I'll give it just a couple of moments for us to get this together. I'll just move this back a little bit so you can see my books, know where to buy them. Great, amazing. Okay. Good afternoon. Hello. Welcome everybody. Welcome to our Instagram Live followers and friends, and our Facebook friends, and of course, our friends on Zoom. How's Moshe's tooth? Yeah, my son's, I think one of his last baby teeth fell out last night. It was a big event. Big event. Okay, welcome everyone. We have an amazing discussion today. What up, Phil? How you doing, brother? Nice to see you. Okay, my dear friends, a lot to discuss today, an amazing discussion. And I'll be honest with you, I wish that I would have known this information when I was younger, like in my teens. I think this would have saved me a lot of challenge and heartbreak. But as they say, we learn from our experiences. And I guess I am today because of all the things we've learned through our own lives. Let's talk about pleasure. That's going to be our discussion today. Remember, this is a series that's on personal self-development in Jewish thought. And really, pleasure is what we humans, this is a human experience, are really all about. We, the human race, are pleasure seekers. The food we eat, the buildings we build, the music we listen to, the relationships we get into or get out of. Everything about us, my friends, is about creating pleasure. Who doesn't want a pleasurable evening with their friends or their spouses? Who doesn't want a pleasurable vacation? Who doesn't want to live in a pleasurable house? What is the Jewish view on pleasure? How do we understand it? And what we're going to look at today is maybe pleasure isn't one monolithic thing. The different types of pleasure that we're going to see. And the problem is that in life, many times we mush all of our pleasures together and throw them into one basket, thinking that if we're not receiving pleasure this way, we're not receiving pleasure at all. But pleasure comes in different types, forms, and varieties. And the essence of this lecture comes from a great Italian Kabbalist from a few hundred years ago called Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto. And in the introduction to his book, Mesilat Yesharim, I believe it's his introduction, I have read it in a couple of years, I'm embarrassed to say, he talks about life and what life is about, and then he kind of makes an aside, and he says, you know what life is? Life is about finding pleasure. But the mistake, my friends, that most people make is we think there's one type, and he actually delineates 5 different types of pleasure. 5 different types. And that is going to be the format for our discussion today. This is not my lecture on my ideas. Many have written and spoken on this topic. I'm going to add a few of my own personal twists and turns. Rav Noach Weinberg of Eish Torah, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, expounded on this a lot. I heard that from him a number of times. I'm going to kind of add my own aspect of reality to this topic. What exactly is pleasure? And why are we so into it? Why do we spend our entire lives chasing pleasure? Well, let's begin and say that maybe pleasure is like flying on a plane. There's different ways to fly on the plane. What's the best way to fly on a plane? First class? First class travel. Not that I've ever flown first class, but I've heard, I've got a peek behind the curtain a few times. There's a curtain there to separate the first class people from the rest of us. Riffraff. First class travel's amazing. When you fly El Al first class, I've heard when they hit you, they use an open hand rather than a fist. It's a much more pleasurable and lovely experience. What comes after first class? second class. But they can't call it second class. You don't want to be a second class flyer. So they give it a nice name, the marketing department. They call it ambassador travel. They call it business, executive class. They'll find out, but really, you're a second class flyer. What comes after that? That's most of us. We're in coach and we're thinking, I'm a third class flyer. No, you're saving money. You're in third class, but you're saving money in coach. That's the way that most of us fly, squeezed, jammed in together like sardines in a can. What comes after third class or coach? Cargo. We're all squished into cargo together. You have the animals and you have the luggage. What comes after cargo? After cargo, they give you a rope, they tie it around the end of the plane, and they say, hang on. Most people who I know in life, and I've met over the years, are barely hanging on. There was a book in the 1980s that became an almost overnight bestseller. It was called Final Exit. And this book taught you how to commit suicide in the safety of your own home. Now, I don't think that everyone who read the book killed themselves, but what a sad reality that everyone wants to have that book ready to go just to be able to check out. We're all traveling, my friends, through this journey called life. We can decide, you can decide which class you want to travel. You want to just fly first class and you're getting the points anyway, or are you just wanting to barely hold on? Rav Moshe Chaim Sato says, you've got to get the most pleasure out of every part of life. But don't think that all pleasures are the same. So let's begin our journey, my friends. Let's make our way up these 5 levels, hopefully ending up, all of us, in first class travel by the end of today's discussion. So once again, we're trying to figure out what pleasure is, okay? By the way, that's a good question. What makes a pleasure pleasurable? What makes that taste of pizza so good? Or that beautiful piece of music we listen to so good? Or that beautiful art, or that sunset or sunrise? What makes pleasure pleasurable? If we're all chasing pleasure and wanting to and willing to spend all of our money and resources just to get a moment of pleasure, what exactly makes a pleasure pleasurable? It's a fair question, worth asking at least once in your life, my dear friends. Many people say, well, pleasure is something that I enjoy and it makes me feel good. Well, I can think of many pleasures that we all experience which may make us feel good but aren't so pleasurable. Okay? After 3 slices of pizza, may make you feel good, but afterwards it's not so pleasurable anymore. It's got to be a lot more than that. Well, let me answer it by asking you, what's the opposite of pleasure? So many people will say pain. Pain and pleasure are opposites. But what I want to show you today, and this is very, very important, is that pain and pleasure are not opposites. The opposite of pain is no pain. Something can be painful and still pleasurable. I mean, think about a marathon runner. You have that guy or girl and they're running and they're schwitzing. If an alien were to come from another planet, a Martian, and see this person, be like, wow, this person's having a terrible day. Actually, they're having tremendous pleasure. This pain and stress and challenge of running 26.2 miles is so painful, and yet it's pleasurable. The opposite of pain is no pain. For us, we believe that something can be painful and pleasurable, like the marathon run, at the same time. So what we're trying to do is not just avoid pain. We're trying to see other forms of pleasure which give us pleasure and at the same time may be painful and yet pleasurable. Because for us, pain and pleasure are not mutually exclusive. That's a very important concept. I wanted to keep that in mind as we go through our different levels. So let's start at the bottom level of pleasure. And we're going to call this the 5th level of pleasure, which Rav Moshe Chaim Sato speaks about. What would you say is the base level of pleasure that everyone tries to achieve in this world? So he says physical pleasure. Physical pleasure, right? The physical senses, smell and taste and hear the music and taste the food and drink the wine and see the sunset. That is a good thing. What is the Jewish view on physical pleasure? Do we say, ugh, terrible, you're enjoying your physical body's enjoying this thing? Is that true? We're like, no. Physical pleasure is a great thing. I mean, once you figure out when, where, how, with whom, and why, once you figure that out right now, you can enjoy your physical pleasures. Physical pleasure is a great thing. The holiest day of the week is Shabbat. Actually, it's the holy day of the entire year. Holier than any other day in the entire year, Shabbat. And what do? We don't stay away from the physical world. We engage it. We eat and we sing and we drink wine and we're intimate. We build up the physicality and raise it to a much higher level. So physical is good. We like physical pleasure, right? In other religions, the highest level a person could reach is when they separate from the physical world, right? The priest or the Buddhist monk, and they're separate on a mountain by themselves. We don't like that. For us, the Jewish people, this is so important. We see as the greatest vision is someone who is engaging in this world, who's running around and schlepping and helping other people and having to eat and making a blessing, enjoying Shabbat, enjoying the Jewish holiday, spending time with friends and family. That's how we elevate the physical world. So physical pleasure is a good thing. And that's the lowest level of pleasure. We have 4 more to do. Before we move on, let's think for just a moment. We talk about pleasure like it's a given, like a known thing. And at a physical level, it is. But there's a few principles we need to add in order to understand pleasure. There's 3 of them, actually. Number 1, when it comes to pleasure, every level of pleasure we're going to look at today. We looked at 1, physical. We're going to look at 4 more. You need to become an expert. We become experts in pleasure because when you become an expert in pleasure, you enjoy it a lot more. For example, I used to lead trips to Israel. I still do. I've led over 30 trips to Israel. One of the things I used to do was take the group to drink kosher wine. There's many kosher wineries and we go for wine tasting. I stopped because everyone got drunk, including me, and we'd lose the rest of the day. But it's a very amazing experience. I recommend everyone goes wine tasting in Israel. So we used to go to a kibbutz, and the lady would come out with a big tray of wines, and she'd bring it out, and everyone would grab a glass, and we're about to drink it. She'd be like, no, don't drink it yet. First of all, you've got to smell the wine. I was like, smell it? All right. Yep, smells like wine. What do you smell? I smell wine. She's like, no. Don't you smell blueberries? Hints of wood? Maybe a little bit of cinnamon? I'm like, no, not really. Now you look at it and you tilt the glass from side to side because if it leaves long lines or legs as it's called, it means it's got the right acidity. And I'm looking, I'm like, yep, looks like wine. And now you want to put the wine in your mouth. And I'm like, oh, finally, I'm going to drink the wine. I make the blessing, I put it in my mouth. She goes, don't swallow. I'm like, don't swallow the wine. Move it around. Move it around the 4 parts of your mouth, right? The various parts of your tongue. What do you taste? I'm like, Now you have to oxygenate it. Try to bring some air into your mouth. I'm like, and she's like, now spit it out. And I'm like, and I swallow it. What's she telling me? She's saying, you enjoy wine, Rabbi. And I do enjoy wine. A dry red if you're interested in knowing. But when she enjoys wine, she enjoys it to a much higher level. She gets a lot more pleasure out of it because she became an expert. So when we talk about pleasure, the way to get the most out of any pleasure, any physical pleasure, is to become an expert in it. That's number 1. Number 2 is watch out for counterfeit pleasures. See, every level of pleasure we're going to speak about has a counterfeit. What does that mean, a counterfeit? That means it smells like the real thing, it tastes like the real thing, it looks like the real thing, but actually it's not. And it's not good for you, it's a destructive force. Why God made this world with every positive pleasure having a counterfeit negative side partner is another discussion. That's to do with free will. We can have a discussion about free will in the future. But that's the way God made the world. For example, physical pleasure has a counterfeit. What's a counterfeit? Looks real, smells real, but actually it's not good for you. That would be taking drugs. Taking drugs, right? Drugs are a physical pleasure, right? Don't tell people, oh, don't take drugs, just say no. That doesn't work. They tried that in the 1980s. It failed terribly. Drugs, good, they feel good. It's just very, very bad for you. It's going to destroy your life. And we'll teach you why that happens. So for us, we say there's a counterfeit. Taking drugs is a great physical pleasure, but it's a destructive force. So it's a counter physical pleasure. Every level of pleasure we're going to look at, 1, become an expert, but 2, watch out for counterfeits. We're going to see that they're going to come there and they're going to pull us off course. And our job is to use our free will to bring us back onto course. And number 3, I like to call this keep your eye on the ball. You ever see those kids play basketball in Manhattan or Brooklyn, right? They're playing day in, day out. Imagine I approach them. I'm like, hey, you having a good time playing basketball? Yeah, Rabbi. I'm like, throw me the ball, throw me the ball. I'm like, carry on playing without the ball. They're like, what? Carry on playing without the ball. What do? They start moving their hands around, pretending to pass. They're like, this isn't fun. After 5 seconds, they give me the ball back. Why? You're doing all the same actions. Because when it comes to pleasure, you've got to keep your eye on the ball. It only becomes pleasurable when you have your ball in play. That means you're actively involved in that thing. And then any pain that comes with the pleasure can actually be used and harnessed for a greater good and more pleasure. With that in mind, let's move on. We said, let's just recap very quickly. We went off the left field, we're going to bring it back. We said that in this world, pleasure is our epicenter. That's what we're after. We're all pleasure seekers. The music we listen to, the friends we make, the relationships, the food we eat, we want it to be pleasurable, enjoyable. And that's good. And we said, well, we looked at one level of pleasure, physical pleasure. And we said that Judaism says it's a great thing. You should enjoy this physical world. There's a great story of Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, a great German rabbi. And he says, you know what? When I die, God's going to say to me, did you go and visit the Alps? And I'll be like, what do you mean visit the Alps? I was too busy. I was helping. I was doing mitzvot. And he's like, I made this beautiful world for you to enjoy, to give you pleasure, right? To motivate you, to see me in creation, right? Go visit the Alps. Go enjoy this physical world, right? Get the most out of it. Pleasure is there not to feel guilty about, to use the right way and to harness. What's better than physical pleasure? So let's move up to level number 4. And level 4 of these 5 levels is love. Love. Love is seen as a greater form of pleasure. Well, what exactly is love? Well, we've spoken about it before. And we said that love actually isn't what many people think it is. Many people think that love is what it does for you, right? I'm in love with him because he does this for me. I'm in love with her because she does this for me. But we said that actually love is not about that. We said the word love in Hebrew is ahava. And before it was a cream being sold from the Dead Sea by Israelis in the malls around America. And believe me, they do well doing that. Before it was that, it was an idea. The word ahava, we said, comes from the word hav, which means to give. And so real love, my friends, is generated and created and maintained through giving. You see, it's not that if I give somebody something, they love me. We know that's not true. If that were true, we wouldn't have so many sport little children running around, right? Imagine an average, child who gets whatever they want, whenever they want, and that kid grows up and they become spoiled little brats. I don't understand. I gave them so much. I took care of them. I hear parents telling me this. I say it myself. And they're so resentful to me. Why? Because taking doesn't generate love. Giving does. And so it's our job to teach our children and ourselves to become givers in every area of our lives. The more you give, the more you love. Now, we said that loving is one level higher than physical pleasure. But actually, the pleasure of love is very, very different. It's not one higher level. It's a complete different world, my friends. You cannot compare in any way, shape, or form physical pleasure and love pleasure. They're two, not different worlds, different universes. And I will prove it to you very, very clearly. It goes like this. Imagine that you have a child. You have a baby, and the baby is born. And I want to come visit you and wish you a Mazal Tov. So I come and knock at your front door. Hi, Rabbi, how are you? I'm like, oh, thank you so much. Mazel Tov on your baby girl, Shoshana, whatever it is. And I sit down. You're like, Rabbi, how can I help? And I'm like, I'd like to buy your baby. I'm sorry? I'd like to buy your baby. You buy my baby. Buy it. I'll give you $50 for your baby. What would any normal mother say? No. $50 for my baby? You crazy? How about $100? No. $1,000? $50,000? $1 million? I usually ask this to women, not men, because many times I've spoken like this, offered this to men, and men usually like, you know what, for $1 million I'll sell. We can have some more. I'm only kidding. Not good. No one in their right mind would give up a baby that was just born, that they just met a few moments ago, for $1 billion. Why? Doesn't make sense. You could do so much damage in level number 5 with $1 billion, right? You could achieve so much, all the physical pleasures for you, your children, grandchildren. And yet one moment of love, pleasure, having a child, you wouldn't give away for $1 billion. Can you see how level 5, physical pleasure, and level 4, love, are completely different worlds? They're not steps or phases. They're different realities. I could give you $1 billion of level 5 pleasure, but you wouldn't give up one moment of level 4 of love for all of level 5. So we see that pleasure can come very clearly in two very different forms. And even if that child is a challenging child, and heaven forbid has health problems or mental problems, all the other challenges we have, we wouldn't give our kids up, someone we love and give to, for $1 billion. Two very different forms of pleasure. So already we're starting to see that pleasure principle is not so simple and not so delineated. Different types of pleasure, even painful pleasure, can be greater than all of physical pleasure. It's possible, and there's your proof. And so love, we said, ahava, comes from giving. The more you give to someone, the more you love them. That's why the Gemara says so beautifully, a mother loves a child more than the child loves the mother. It's just a reality. Why? Because the mother gives to the child from day one, starts with a bottle and then moves on to things and goods and fun times. And children, generally speaking, are takers. Right? That's why we enter into this world with our hands closed. We enter into this world as takers, but we leave this world, all of us, with our hands open. We all leave this world as givers after a lifetime of giving. The more you give, the more you love. That's why a mother is always going to love her child more than the child loves the mother. That's just a reality. And that's okay. Because once, if you're blessed to have children yourself, you'll be able to give more love than receive it. That doesn't mean that the love relationship isn't painful at times. And this is a mistake many people make. They think that if I'm in a love relationship and there's a pain factor over here, I can't enjoy it. But it's the exact opposite. It could well be that the painful aspects of your relationship are actually the times when the love principle is growing the most. When everything's going great and fantastic, there's no growth. You're just having a good time. That's the physical level pleasure. But you're actually investing in the hardship and challenge that comes with relationships. And relationships can be extremely difficult. I deal with them a lot in my life. Dealing with the young couples who are about to get married, who just got married in the process of dating. It's difficult. It takes hard work, let alone having children who just ruin the entire thing for all of us. It takes effort and energy. The more you put into it, the more pleasure there is. Fantastic. So far, we've looked at two types of pleasure. And we said that you need to become an expert in both levels. Become an expert in physical pleasure. Understand why it's good for me, why it's not good for me, what I can get out of it. Then we said, there's a higher level of pleasure, which is love. And we said, become an expert in love. Think about it. What's happening in the relationship? How do I grow as a person? How do I grow my love relationships? How do I become a more loving person? That takes effort, ideas, and thoughts. What's the counterfeit of love? We said that every level of pleasure has a counterfeit. We said, for example, by physical pleasure, there's drugs. What's the counterfeit, my dear friends, of love? Is there a counterfeit? I think so. It's actually a form of love that's like a drug. And that is, fantasy, obsession, lust. Some people mistake that for love. It looks like love, it smells like it tastes like love, but it's not real love. Because love is about giving, but lust is about taking. Now, sometimes you've got to take, we said. We can't all be giving all the time because that's how you build up resentment. But in the end, we've all got to give, but sometimes you have to take. But be careful. Is your relationship real? Is it authentic? Become an expert. Keep your eye on the ball. Is this a counterfeit? Is this a lust relationship? Is this a taking relationship in essence? Or is it a giving? I've had the privilege of performing, at this point, after 20 years as a rabbi, nearly 150 weddings. Every couple who has stood under the chuppah have always wanted to love and give each other. No one stands under the chuppah saying, this will last a year and then I'm done. We all want our marriages to last forever and ever and ever. And yet we see them break down. Why? What is the secret? What are the challenges over here? Well, there's a lot to this question, and that's a discussion for another time. But one thing I've noticed is that everyone starts their marriage hopefully as two givers. Then sometimes one becomes a taker. In essence, we don't have to take sometimes, but in essence, become a taker, and the other one gives, and resentment is built up. And then at some point, they just both become takers, and it all falls apart. It all falls apart. When I see a couple who are sitting in front of me, which happens a lot, and I see them arguing with each other, I'm like, we have what to work with. We have some traction, right? We have some purchase to grab onto in order to fix this relationship. But when they don't speak for 6 months, then it's over. There's got to be some activity over there. Love involves giving and effort in order for it to grow. It may not be the pleasure that we associate with pleasure. It may be painful, but once we said again, it can be painful and pleasurable. Just like lifting heavy weights, it's painful. But the pleasure is, I know through this exercise, I'm going to build my muscles. Or going for a long run. It's painful, but it's pleasurable because I know the results of this effort are going to be worth it. It's true in relationships. It's true in our spiritual service as well. I'll be honest with you. Sometimes I don't want to pray or do a certain mitzvah or do a chesed. And my wife always says to me, these are my wife's famous words, suck it up. Just got to get it done. You just do it. And sometimes you check in, check out. And it may not feel pleasurable, but that may be the highest level of pleasure. Okay. We've done 2 levels of pleasure, level 5, and now we've moved up to level 4. What's level 3? What's a higher level of pleasure than love? You would have thought, what's better than love? Isn't that the greatest form of pleasure? There's something greater. And now we're going to move into an area where we have to think a little bit more and have to investigate, become experts at the higher levels. There's physical pleasure, great, amazing. There's love pleasure, true as well. You know what number 3 is? Meaning. Finding meaning in your life. We know people, celebrities especially, right, who have so much love in their lives, beautiful spouses, beautiful children, so much physical pleasure. They live in beautiful palatial palaces and they have so much money. And you think, wow, that's an amazing life. That looks so good. They have it all. We all think that. I know I think that. No, we don't usually allow such magazines into our home. But when you check out a supermarket, there's always this beautiful couple on the front of the magazine, this celebrity couple, right? This Brangelina, whoever it is. And they're always walking up and down the beach with their gorgeous children and they have so much money and they're famous. And we think, wow, that's pretty nice. And you come out the next week, right? And there's like a split in the page, you know? It's like Splitsville. You're like, what happened? How did this occur? Because physical pleasure and love is not enough. There's a higher level of pleasure, which is meaning. Everyone needs to have meaning in their lives. It's not enough. I'll say this 1,000 times. Just to have physical pleasure and just to have love in your life. You could be in a very loving relationship and you could be extremely successful when it comes to physical pleasures and physical success. But my friend, if you don't have meaning, a purpose to live, then what are you doing? There was a book by Viktor Frankl. He survived the Holocaust. He was a psychiatrist before and after the war. And he wrote a book. Why? He found that the people who were able, from his own personal experience, who were able to survive the concentration camps were the people who had a meaning in their life. And he found that after the war, he was meeting these people who were complaining of challenges in their lives. And they'd sit with him and he'd be like, okay, what's wrong? How can I help? How's your family? And they'd be like, okay. He goes, money? Yeah, we do okay. Right? Children? Yeah. Health? Okay. So what's wrong? I'm depressed. And he realized that you can have love and physical pleasure, but at some point you need to have meaning in your life. And he wrote a book, Man's Search for Meaning. It's a thin book, well worth reading this book. If you haven't read it, buy it now. It's a thin, easy book, well worth reading. Man's Search for Meaning. It's not enough just to have physical pleasure and love. You can have the most loving spouse. And we know and we see so many marriages break apart. You've got to have a purpose. What am I doing here? What's my meaning in life? I'll give you another example. We said physical pleasure is very different from love, right? We said that loving relationships can do a lot for us, right? They can really help us. And we said that we're willing to take a moment of love, having a child, that we wouldn't exchange for all of level 5 for $1 billion. The same is true, however, for love and meaning. Imagine it's 1946, okay? Right after the Second World War. And there's a family living in Israel, okay? And the state of Israel hasn't been founded yet. and there's a knock at the door, and there's a young boy there with a old rifle on his back. He can't be more than 17 years old. And he's like, are you the Cohens? And you're like, yeah, we're the Cohens. He says, do you have a son at home? He goes, yeah, how old is he? He goes, he's 16. He goes, we need him. Why? Because we're fighting over here. We're trying to build a state. And these people are willing to allow the children that they love, that they wouldn't give away for $1 billion 16 years ago, willing to give them away for a higher level of meaning to go fight. And these people could say to this young boy, tell me, is my son going to get hurt? Is he going to hurt somebody else? And they're still willing to do that. That's meaning. So can you see how love is so important, greater than physical? And yet when it comes to meaning, good meaning, people are willing to give up everything that they love. Now, we spoke already about counterfeit. Are there counterfeit pleasures? We said, yeah. A counterfeit of physical pleasure is drugs. A counterfeit of love, we said, is lust or infatuation or obsession. Unhealthy love. Is there a counterfeit of meaning? Absolutely. The world is full of counterfeit meanings. If you go back to the beginning of Judaism, Abraham, as in Abraham and Sarah, our forefathers and mother, they spent their entire lives telling people not to worship ABC. I know we think of the original Judaism, everyone's so loving, but really most of what Abraham did was don't use your levels of meaning for finding nonsense, right? Fake, false, inauthentic, counterfeit meaning. The world is full of it. And his day was idol worship. And idol worship in his day, for the most part, was killing children for God. People used to think, they still do, by the way. People still think that when they blow themselves up from God, that's what God wants. And Abraham turned around and says, no, that is fake meaning. He had an opinion. Nowadays, no one can have opinions. But in those days, he had an opinion. Don't die for God, live for God. Right? That's why the 10th test of Abraham was to take his son Isaac up onto a mountain in full view of everyone else, right? Thinking he was going to kill his son. And God says, no, don't kill his son. This is not what I want. That became a living example of what we shouldn't do. And that stayed with us forever. We want to live a life. So there always is false meaning. Every ism that's come through history, most of them, right, have been false and counterfeit pleasures. But meaning is a greater pleasure. And we're willing to give up all of love and all of physical pleasure. People are willing to join armies, right? Give up their livelihoods in order to fight for their countries. And in the right cases, that's a very, very good thing. So meaning can trump everything else. That's level number 3. What's 2? What could be greater, my friends, than the pleasure of meaning, of finding a purpose, your mission in life? Something that people don't even think about. By the way, some people, they stay on level 5 pleasure their entire lives. All they want to do is just amass things and don't. And some people never get married and never really build loving relationships, whether at work, right, or in their own personal lives. Very sad. And some people have the first 2 and don't look for a purpose, a reason. What am I here for? What am I doing? But there's a higher level. Can you believe it? There's 2 more levels we have to look at, which are above physical pleasure, love, and meaning. And that is creativity. Creativity. That, says Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, is a higher level of pleasure. What does that mean, creativity? So up to now, we've been pretty selfish, right? We enjoy life, we take physical pleasures, we enjoy the love, and we enjoy meaning in our own lives, we find meaning. But at some point, are we able and willing to be creative and find pleasure for others? That itself is a higher level of pleasure. Okay? Let me give you an example. My kids are at camp right now. I was a big camper. I love camp, especially sleepaway camp. I prefer being a counselor to a camper, but that's just who I am. That's my personality. But I enjoyed it very, very, very much. You know who enjoys camp the most? The camp director. Let alone the money he or she is making or not making. But the person who builds it up, who creates the pleasure for other people, they get a lot more out of it. The builder builds the building. They put the bricks one on top of the other. But when the whole thing is finished, the builder looks at it and feels great. But you know who really enjoys it? The architect who created it. So finding meaning is one thing. But creating the experience from the beginning, that's already a godly trait. That's a much higher level of pleasure. That's the general in the army. The soldier finds meaning in their job, but the general who oversees the entire battle, they get a lot more pleasure, as it were, by creating it. So I can enjoy life and find meaning, but am I able to share and create that reality for other people? That takes a lot of effort, and it's a challenge, but you get a lot more out of it. That's why the camp director is creating the experience. The kids enjoy themselves, but the camp director who's sweating and schwitzing and running around makes sure this is happening, this is not happening. Their level of pleasure may not seem pleasurable, but is a much higher level of pleasure. Okay, that's where we're up to. Is there a counterfeit creativity? Yeah, there is actually. How could there be? What counterfeit is there of creativity? Some people find pleasure by creating chaos. I mean, think about those online programs, right, that go out, these like things that go and create challenge for other people. How about that? These people, these computer viruses, for example, extremely creative, but destructive. It's a counterfeit. They're sick and twisted, but they get pleasure out of destroying other people, right? Your average dictator, extremely creative, finds creative ways to hurt and kill masses of people. They find some sick and twisted pleasure in that, but we say that is a counterfeit pleasure. Are we able to create meaning and love and physical pleasure for other people? That's a high level of pleasure. It's more subtle. It may not be so apparent, right? It's like the marathon runner who seems to be in a lot of pain and challenged doing what he or she is doing, but there's a high level of pleasure over there than the spectator. So if you look at the scene of the marathon, you have the people waving, smiling, you think they're having a good time, and the person who's running and schwitzing is having a terrible time. It's actually the other way around. The person who's running and schwitzing is getting way more pleasure out of the experience than the person who's standing on the side, nice and warm and cozy, just waving and smiling. Isn't that life? The people on the sidelines who are waving and smiling, it looks like they're having a good time, and the people who are working hard are not having pleasure. The real pleasure comes from productivity, by finding meaning and creating that for yourself and for other people. It's a much higher level. Those are the people who invest themselves in life, in company, in relationships a lot more than other people. We've now done 4 levels, my friend. We've gone through the various classes. We left the outside of the plane. We entered cargo. Then we went into coach, business class. But we all want to be first class flyers. We're all flying through this life together. We might as well, my friends, fly first class. Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto says the greatest pleasure a person can have is by tapping into the source of all pleasures. And as we said, every pleasure is special, but every type of pleasure is different. But if you can tap into the source, if you can connect to God, the ultimate source of all pleasure, even if it's a momentary, transient experience, that could be the highest pleasure a person can have. Feeling of clarity, of connecting to a higher divine source, he says, is the greatest level of pleasure a person can achieve. Connecting to God, he says, even if it's just a moment, connecting to the divine source and origin of all pleasure and all reality can be the highest level. Is there a counterfeit? Yeah. There are many false gods that are worshipped which look and smell like the real thing, but they're actually not. But you've got to, as we said, become an expert and keep around the ball. All right? You know, when it comes to counterfeits, I had a friend of mine who used to work in the police force, part of the FBI, I think, and he told me that he was trained for 6 weeks in counterfeit money. Counterfeit money is a very, very big business around the world. Making counterfeit dollars is a big business. And he went in on his first day of training, and he walked in and says, "Wow, can I see some counterfeit money?" And the trainer who was there says, "We don't have any." It's like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "We don't keep any counterfeit money." He says, "Well, how do you train your agents to look for counterfeit money if you don't show them counterfeit money?" And he said something very, very wise and very true. He said, "I'll tell you what we do. When you arrive here for the 6-week rotation, we are going to show you real money, real $1 bills, real $5 bills, and 10s and 20s and 50s and 100s. And you're going to live with that money day and night. You're going to smell it. You're going to eat with it. You're going to sleep with it. Every part of you. If you stick with real money for 6 weeks, after the 6 weeks have gone, someone gives you counterfeit money, you'll know the difference. If you know what you're about, if you know what physical pleasure is really all about, if you know what love is really all about, and you become an expert and learn and understand and listen and read and see people are successful, if you find true meaning in your life, because it's not enough just to have love and physical pleasure, if you create that meaning for other people, if you connect to the one true God, eventually, my friends, anything else comes along, you'll be like, that's not real. I've lived the real thing. I've realized it in my life, and I realize that everything else is a counterfeit. That's what you want to become. 5 different levels of pleasure. And by the way, the greatest level of pleasure connected to God could be just a momentary thing, but that's fine. Even level 5, eating pizza, is a momentary pleasure. 1 bite of pizza, you taste good. 5 bites, right? By the 15th slice, I'm done. So every form of pleasure that we have in this world, it really represents this world, which itself is a short-term reality. So God, in his wisdom, created pleasures that are all short-lived. Every pleasure that we have eventually is just a short momentary pleasure. Whether it's the slice of pizza, whether it's the great music we listen to, whether it's the art, everything that we do is momentary. Whether it's our relationship, people who want to be in relationships and they want it to be high all the time. No, that's not the way it is. Even the greatest loving relationships, we said, are created by giving, and can't constantly be taking and giving you what you think and what you think you need. It's always work, it's always effort. That's what we're looking at, whether it's meaning, creativity, or even connecting to God. There are some people who think that when they find spirituality, religion, it's going to be all fun all the time. No, it's not the way it is. It could be just one moment. Some person says something to you, see something, you hear something, you're like, I feel connected now. Now I get it. I'll finish off, since we've been quoting Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, with the end of his introduction. And he says something unbelievable. Listen to these words. If you hear these words, it was worth my mother having me. He says, let me tell you what life is and how to really understand pleasures in this world. Life is standing, he says, on a mountaintop. And it's dark. You're lost. You don't know your way home. It's raining and you're really hungry. That, he says, is life. Isn't that terrible? That's how we Jews understand life? Yes. Because all of a sudden, there's a bolt of lightning that comes out of the sky and lights up everything, and you know exactly how to get down from this mountain and find your way home. But as lightning works, as soon as it appears, it disappears. Said Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, pleasure is that moment of lightning that lights up the sky, and you just get a glimpse of goodness, whether it's physical pleasure or love or meaning or creativity. The job we have is to take that moment, because sometimes it is just a moment of real, truthful pleasure, hold on to it and use it to light up our lives and show us our futures. There is no such thing as constant pleasure. There are moments, whether, as we said, it's physical, love, meaning, creativity, or even connecting to God. We take them and we travel through life holding on to them. That, my friends, is the 5 levels of pleasure. And the highest level, we said, actually all of the levels we spoke about, you actually see 1 day a week, on Shabbat. On Shabbat, we take the physical and we love each other and we find meaning and we help create that experience for other people who come into our lives in our community or our Shabbat tables, and we connect to God. Really, Shabbat is the example, the paradigm of what the pleasure principle, all 5 levels are in this world. Thank you all for listening. Our journey today is complete. Thank you for being part of this experience. If you enjoyed it, please share this very important topic and lecture with your friends. It'll be available online on Instagram Live and on Facebook Live. I'll see you all, God willing, next Tuesday night, where our Fundamentals in Judaism class will continue. Wish you all a successful, healthy, and blessed week. Thank you, guys.